Hello, my name is Jonathan Mahr, and today we're making a video on how to build a solar panel. We got it right here. We're going to go through each step. We're going to briefly explain how to solder the cells, what materials you need, and what tools you need to do it all. So I'm completing this project with readily available materials and tools available at any local home building store, Home Depot, Lowe's, pretty much anywhere there. The only parts that you really need to order special are the solar cells, and as well as this encapsulation fluid, or it's called encapsulant. It's a two-part silicone material. You can buy it from any solar retailer or online. I purchased mine from ML Solar. They're a reliable company. They have an eBay store online. You'll be able to track them down easily enough. And besides that, the only other things you really need from them are your wiring. This right here is your bus wire. This is going to connect your row to row after you've created the cells. You can tell because it's thicker as opposed to this tabbing wire here, which is much thinner. But they're readily apparently different. And I should note that these are solder covered, so you won't need to buy solder separately. Also, they should give you a flux pen with it. You'll need this as well. Besides the cells and the encapsulant, you are going to need some kind of substrate, some kind of backing to put your cells on, mount them on there. I chose some 3-ply maple because it's lightweight, rigid, and you want it to be able to withstand the elements and wind and stuff being wherever you put it. Another thing is you'll need a shielding. You can basically use any kind of glass or plastic material. They have special solar glass, which is a low iron, low reflective glass. The point is you want as much light to get through this to your cells as possible. But really you could use any glass or anything. This is a piece of polycarbonate I got from a recycled 60-inch TV. Also, you're going to need some kind of framing. You'll have channeling here to go around your edge. You could use wood, you can use anything. The real point to this is just extra durability and making it extra rigid against the elements. The other materials I use in this video are some electrical tape, some painter's tape or masking tape will work, a small tube of liquid nails. Also, I use some kilts for your substrate. And also I use oil-based acrylic or oil-based enamel. I chose oil-based enamel because it's the most sun-resistant, the most weatherproof, and the biggest thing you want to be concerned about with your substrate here, your backing, is you want it moisture-proof. Any moisture gets inside of your solar panel and you're going to get shorting, you're going to get cell deterioration, and it could corrode your wiring. So just keep in mind you want it as moisture-proof as possible. Also, I should note that I'm using white because it's going to reflect the most amount of sunlight back out. Even though the theory behind these cells is you want to collect as much sunlight as possible, heat is actually the enemy of these. So any light that's not collected, you want reflected back out, and it's the white. As far as tools, I'm using a 100-watt soldering iron here. I chose the 100-watt because the 30-40 watts aren't quite hot enough to melt your tabbing wire onto the cells, and if you use a 200-plus watt, you will barbecue the cells. Definitely want to not destroy your solar cells. Also use some saws to cut this, basic stuff. Also a caulking gun. And besides that, this is basically everything I used in this entire project. We don't really get into the junction box, but I'll mention that at the end of the video what this is for. But right now we're just focused on building the main panel and connecting all the cells together. And that's all the materials you need. In this part of the video, we're going to be giving a brief crash course on how to solder the wires to your cells. I don't know if I mentioned it before, but I'm using 6-inch by 6-inch monocrystalline 3-bus bar cells. I chose these because they were really cheap, but mostly because they were the most efficient ones that ML Solar offered. Typically, you'll see cells like this that just have 2 bus bars on them, and these are polycrystalline, meaning that you can usually see it looks like a bunch of different crystals all melted together. these are one solid crystal, more efficient. And also, it should be noted that these 3 bus bars are all 3 positive. All the ones on the bottom, those are all your negatives. So once we connect them, you got to keep track of which is your positive, which is your negatives. Start by setting up your work table. Mind that the soldering gun will get hot enough to roast whatever is underneath your cell when you're soldering, so make sure you don't solder on top of something that you mind getting barbecued. Also, on a side note, you do want to keep your station as clear as possible. It's fun to break these cells. They're really, really fragile. They break at nothing, but that gets expensive, so you really don't want to break them. So you want to keep everything nice and clean and clear and be really conscientious of what you're doing. Also, I should note that wearing a mask and having adequate ventilation is important. There's a lot of metal smoke coming off of this, and breathing it in isn't good for you. Alright, so we're going to start by putting wire onto our cells. You'll want some kind of brass pad like this to keep your soldering tip nice and clean. You want the most accurate distribution of heat as possible. If this is dirty, it's not going to melt your cells as good as you want, or your wiring onto your cells as good as you want. I use mostly a file. Go ahead and keep this as clean as possible. Like I said, the better connection you have from this to your cells, the better it'll be and easier it'll be to solder your wires on. So once you're good to go. Oh, almost just made the biggest mistake ever. You want to go and trace your line along your cell with your flux pen. This flux is going to allow your wires to heat up enough to melt, or the solder on the wires more so. And another thing, this tabbing wire that's going to go on here, you want to make sure this is long enough to connect 2 of your cells together. You're only ever going to connect 2 at a time before you connect them all together anyways. No matter what you do, you're going to want your wire to be able to stretch across 2 and then have about 1 inch, 3/4 of an inch hanging off on each side. About like that. So this wire is about the perfect length. And so I went through and I cut all of these beforehand, had all my wires ready, so you can just go. Gently put that back over here. Once you got your flux on there, begin soldering. I'm sure there's other videos on how to solder, but I'm just giving a brief crash course in case you're not too familiar with soldering. And here we go. Also, the slower the better. You don't want to rush through this, otherwise it doesn't melt correctly. So you just go nice and slow and make sure you get a nice solid connection on your wires. And I'm using some nitrile gloves right now just to keep my fingerprints off of the face of the cells. Honestly, it doesn't matter too much. After you get all your rows lined, you're going to encapsulate it with that fluid, and you won't really be able to see any fingerprints on it, but just for posterity, we're using a glove. And I suggest doing a couple of these before you actually go through and solder all your cells. You definitely want to get your technique down. It's an art to get your wires even on those bus bars there. But you get the hang of it after you've done it a few times. And that's soldering the wire. It should dry, set up pretty quick, just like that. You can do that to each of your 3 bars on here, or 2, depending on whatever cell you should choose. And what I do like for this panel over here, this is 28 cells. And I went through and each individual cell connected the 3 wires on here, just like you see here. So you get all these, get all your number right, and then in the next segment I'll demonstrate how to connect cell to cell to make a row.